So today we're going to talk about Wallerstein's world systems theory, which is another theory about development, which tries to explain why some countries are rich and why some are poor. And this guy Wallerstein is going to be a lot less positive than Rostow. He's going to be much more pessimistic and see kind of the bad things that are going on in the world. So what Wallerstein says is, really, when you get down to it, there's two main different types of countries. There's core countries. These are the rich and powerful countries. These might be like the United States. They might be like the United Kingdom, or even like Japan or South Korea. These are going to be really, really rich and powerful countries. Then you have periphery countries. These are going to be your less developed countries. The way this works then is that Wallerstein says the whole world is set up by these guys to help these guys stay rich and powerful. And that any of the stuff that you see with Rostow, where countries are trading, trying to become more developed, that's kind of a bad idea. And the way he kind of lays it out is like this. Look, you have periphery countries, and think about the stuff that we know periphery countries, poor countries make, right? They're going to have natural resources, things like metals, things like fruits, things like bananas. And these things, relatively speaking, are pretty cheap. I think bananas are a good example because, we've talked about bananas a lot. Bananas can sell for just a couple cents a banana. They're really not that expensive. And what Wallerstein will say is, look, yeah, you can trade it to the core country, right? You're trading your bananas. And yes, you do get a little bit of money in exchange, but not much, right? And then what happens if the core country finds another periphery country who's willing to sell their bananas for even cheaper? Well, then that core country, they're not going to want to trade with you, right? So Wallerstein's big thing is that the rich countries take advantage of the periphery countries. And I think that is the key to understanding this, is that the core countries take advantage. They exploit. That's this fancy word that we've been rolling out for this. The core countries exploit the poor periphery countries. They take advantage of them. And the periphery countries are really kind of stuck, right? The periphery countries then are dependent on the core countries. They need the core countries to get that little itty bitty bit of money. The way Wallerstein sees it is, why would these guys want to share their money, right? Why are they going to want to build up these poor countries when it might ultimately weaken the core country when all is said and done? The periphery country needs loans, like we've talked about before, and maybe they'll say, yeah, we'll give you some loans, but in exchange, you need to do exactly as we say, right? And if those loans were to suddenly go away because you don't do what we say, because you don't give us good trade deals, because you don't give us the first right to have some of your precious metals that we can make for cell phones, too bad. You depend on us. Also, the way this works too, that just makes a lot of sense to me too, is as these periphery countries are trying to become more developed, right? They're trying to have more complicated types of jobs. Well, those types of jobs are not easy to set up. So let's say this periphery country over here, this poor country, they want to start a factory, right? Well, you can't just build a factory out of bamboo and trees and junk, right? You need to have expensive equipment, right? And guess who makes and sells that expensive equipment? Guess who the periphery country has to buy that stuff from? The core countries, right? So what ends up happening is the periphery country might take out a loan from the core country. Now they owe the rich country money, and they're also taking that money and buying expensive stuff to get set up. And then, at the end of the day, what do they get to do with this expensive equipment? They make a factory that then sells cheap t-shirts. So they spend all that money, they take out loans, they have to rely on this core country, and at the end of the day you get a factory that only makes cheap t-shirts. And yeah, they are able to bring in a little bit of money from that core country, but they had to spend way more to get started, and at the end of the day the periphery country ends up getting stuck in a kind of an abusive relationship with the core country. That's really how Wallerstein's world systems theory works. You'll notice from your notes that there is a third type of country, and that's going to be something called semi-periphery. And these are pretty rare countries, but they're important enough that Wallerstein wanted to talk about them a little bit. So you have these semi-periphery countries. They're kind of in between, right? And what they do is they take advantage of poor countries too, just like the core, the bullies, right? I think it's good to call these guys bullies. They take advantage of the poor countries too, but they're just not at a point where they're the big bullies yet, right? They also get taken advantage of by core countries. So they're going to be kind of in between. They're kind of like the kid who gets bullied by some kids, gets bullied by the popular kids, yet they turn around and bully like kids who really can't defend themselves. So a semi-periphery country is going to be a country that's kind of powerful in their region, but again, is not like a heavy-duty world player. So when I think of semi-periphery countries, I think of places like Mexico and Thailand. Think about how much Mexico needs the United States. Mexico grows a ton of our food. Mexico makes a ton of our products. If all of a sudden Mexico were to just get cut off, right, from the trade that they do with the United States, that would not be good. Mexico really does rely a lot on the core for that money, for our agricultural stuff, for food. At the same time, Mexico is way more powerful than some of the countries in its neighborhood. It's much more powerful than El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, these little itty-bitty countries that will rely on Mexico for loans, or maybe will rely on them for technology that they can't get themselves, and maybe they can't afford from the richest countries. But ultimately, Mexico is not a world power, right? They still rely on the United States. Thailand, same thing. Thailand in its neighborhood is much more powerful and can kind of boss around places like Cambodia or Laos or Burma. But when you compare Thailand to a place like Japan or China, it's no good, right? Like Thailand probably has to listen to whatever China tells it to do, because China has the money and the power to boss around a place like Thailand. So this is kind of a rare model where there's not a lot of stages or steps. It's just relationships, right? Core countries take advantage of the semi-periphery and periphery. Semi-periphery take advantage of periphery, but they also kind of get exploited by the core. And ultimately, what ends up happening, at least according to Wallerstein, is sure, the core does spread a little bit of money and a little bit of development out in the world, but at the end of the day, they're the ones collecting on the loans, they're the ones selling the complicated technology, and at the end of the day, they kind of rule over these places indirectly, right? These other places have to do what they tell them to do because they owe them money or because they rely on the technology from the core. And that's the world systems theory model by Wallerstein.